Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Brevard Sports Network. A little unconventional this evening. We're taking a phone call, but not from just anybody here tonight. We are taking a phone call from, in my opinion, the best college football analyst in the entire land. That's right. Please help me welcome here tonight Phil Steele. And you see me hold up every year. I always say Happy New Year when I'm holding this magazine up in my hand. Phil, first of all, welcome to Brevard Sports Network. And my first question for you, Phil, is when, if ever, do you get any time off?
Alan, this is actually my favorite time of the year right now. I'm doing like 6 or 7 radio shows a day, maybe working 50, 60 hours a week. So it's pretty enjoyable this time of year. Magazine season's pretty grueling. It's 7 months. It starts the Sunday after Thanksgiving, goes all the way through June the 7th this past year. And then, of course, football season, trying to keep track of 133 teams. I've got 12 TVs in front of me. I'm watching 12 games all day long on Saturday at the same time. So this is my fun time of the year right now.
Well, my goodness gracious, the 12 TVs are right up our alley. First, Phil. First, let me jump right to it. Obviously, here in the Sunshine State, we're located in East Central Florida. This is big Florida Gator country, and when you look at the Florida Gators this year, you don't want to say anybody's on the hot seat there, obviously, with the way college football is now. But, Phil, I suspect Gator fans are already getting antsy. The quarterback situation there is a little bit up, not a little bit, a lot up in the air. How do you see the Florida Gators for 2023?
Yeah, and first of all, for Gator fans, I do want to remind you, Florida State opened 3-6 and 5-7 under Mike Norvell, and now they are after a 10-3 season are going to be the preseason favorite to win the ACC this year. So patience, patience, patience. But I got to be honest with you, when Florida signed Graham Mertz, I wasn't wild about it. I thought that Napier's offense operates best with a mobile running quarterback, and Graham Mertz, of course, does not fit that capability. But after going over the team with Coach Napier, he likes Graham Mertz. Feels he's a highly intelligent quarterback, someone who's got the arm talent. He can run when needed, and he's scored very high on the cognizant test. So, I mean, here's a guy that he has a lot of confidence in, and that made me feel a lot better about Florida. I mean, you look at the backfield with Trevor Etienne, Johnson, and Carroll. They're loaded there. Ricky Pearsall was a revelation coming over last year from Arizona State, and he returns a receiver. The offensive line should be better. They added a couple of transfers with Damian George from Alabama and Micah Mazuka from Baylor. And defensively, they should be better. What I don't like about Florida this year is the schedule. They will probably be an underdog in 7 games this year. That's why the Vegas over-under win total just 5.5 when you look at the Gators opening up at Utah, Tennessee at home, at Kentucky, at South Carolina. I mean, only having 3 home games in the SEC is never the best situation for Florida to have. So, as still a rather inexperienced team, number 109 on my experience chart, the number 1 toughest schedule in the entire country. But I think Florida's going to flirt with bowl game this year. We'll see if they get it. And I think great things are going to come to Florida next year.
Let me ask you this about Florida. Obviously, with the way this offense has gone in the past and what Gator fans have been treated to with air attacks, and even last year with Anthony Richardson and his electricity sometimes, are Gator fans just simply going to have to be patient this year? Is this going to be a ground control game with the backs they have back there and that offensive line?
Yeah, well, Mertz can throw the ball, and I think you'll see him and Ricky Pearsall hooking up quite a bit. I like the tight end room led by Dante Sanders. But I think they will rely on the run game this year with that great stable of running backs and the offensive line.
Let's move on to Central Florida, Phil. We're here with Phil Steele and UCF Gus Malzahn and John Rice Plumlee, their first year in the Big 12. I don't see a lot of people picking UCF at the bottom of that conference this year. I see a lot of people picking them in the middle of that pack. Where do you see Malzahn and Rice Plumlee in their first year in a P5 conference?
Yeah, there are 4 new teams joining the Big 12 this year. Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, and UCF. And of the 4 teams, to me, clearly the best one is UCF. And if any of those four teams are actually going to contend in the Big 12, it would be the Central Florida Knights. And when I look at UCF, Gus Malzahn, when I talked to him and went over the team with him, he said they've been preparing for this move for 2 years. And he, of course, was a head coach in the SEC, so he knows what they're about to deal with in the Big 12. I like the depth at quarterback now. Remember last year, problems arose when John Rice Plumlee got banged up. And now with Timmy McClain backing him up, I think they're in better shape there. I like Harvey and Richardson at running back. The receiving core is potentially explosive despite losing Ryan O'Keefe. They've got Hudson and Baker both back along with their tight end Holler. The offensive line looks solid, and defensively, Jason Johnson and Ryan Davis at linebacker are a couple of NFL guys. So this is really a very good UCF team. They'll probably be an underdog at Kansas State, at Oklahoma, and at Texas Tech, and potentially at Boise State early. But as mentioned, of the newcomers to the Big 12, this is the one team that has that potential to actually throw its hat into the mix of finishing in the upper half of the Big 12 this year.
Do you see, obviously Malzahn with the offense, but do you see any issues at all with two first-year coordinators?
I like the additions at the coordinator spots. It's always a little bit of a transition, but I think they're going to be just fine.
All right, now the big. Let's talk about the school everyone's gushing over here in the state. And Phil, let me just premise Florida State by saying this: I have watched Mike Norvell for the last 3 years, even going back to the pandemic, really put this program out into these communities here in Florida. Mike Norvell has once again begun to recruit this state like it used to be recruited back in the good old days of the 80s and the 90s. He does these camps with kids that are in middle school to early, to late middle school, real early high school. He has really entrenched this school into these communities, and you're really starting to see this pay off. Obviously, with a quarterback that's a dark horse Heisman candidate, can Florida State be that outside college football playoff team that everybody thinks they could possibly be?
Yeah, I think they definitely have that opportunity this year. And, Alan, when I looked at Florida State, if you look at the 7 units, the offense and defense, quarterback, running back, receiver, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, and DB, naturally, Florida State ranks in my top units in all 7 of those categories. But what really stood out to me is they actually rank in the top 15 in all 7 categories. So this is a really good offense and really good defense. And what we've seen from Jordan Travis, remember back in 2019, he was mostly a running quarterback. He ran for 228 yards, only threw for 79. The next year, he hit 55% of his passes. The next year, 63%. And last year, 64% with a 24-5 ratio. So he's a dangerous runner that's improved his passing each and every year. And I think he'll improve again this year. You look at that backfield with Trey Benson and Toafili. They are loaded. The receiving core, Johnny Wilson is back. They add in a Keon Coleman from Michigan State, who left the Spartans after spring practice was over. He was 13 Big Ten last year. That's a loaded receiving room. The offensive line, if you follow Florida State football, and I'm sure you do, Alan, the offensive line's always been a weakness for them the last 6 or 7 years. Now it's turned into a strength. And, they've even added some transfers to bulk that up. Defensively, bringing in a guy like Braden Fisk from Western Michigan to go along with Jared Verse, to go along with some of these players they have on defense. This is a loaded team. Big game right out of the box with LSU. That's going to say a lot about their chances this year. And then how about that trip to Death Valley? Remember, Clemson's only lost once in Death Valley the last 6 years. Last year, Clemson came into Florida State and came out of there with a win, and now get them at home. I think that might be the game that determines the ACC this year. Most likely it will be. Of course, they may meet again then in the ACC title game, but they're a legitimate contender this year, and they're the number 2 on my experience chart.
You look at that opening game against LSU last year, a big 24-23 win on that blocked field goal or extra point there at the end of that game last year, Phil. That really catapulted this football team. The obvious question is, yes, that game is huge, but if Florida State drops that game, how much pressure does that then put on them? Because 2 lost teams, as we've seen, Phil, aren't exactly college football playoff darlings.
Yeah, and this being the final final year of the 14 playoff, I would think that a two-loss team would have a tough chance making a playoff. Now, they would get their opportunity. If they did lose to Clemson, won the rest of their games, they would play Clemson again for the ACC championship. If they won there, potentially they could get back in, but it would make it pretty perilous at that point. I think the LSU game is big out of the box, and in Vegas right now, they're an underdog in that game, about a field goal underdog. I favor Florida State. I think they're the better team. The game's in Orlando, and I like Florida State to come out of there with the win.
Yeah, we're real excited. We're going over there ourselves, so we're real pumped up to be there. At the south end of the state, we've got the University of Miami Hurricanes, Mario Cristobal, and Phil, I guess my question is where is this program? And if I said to you, Phil, what is the state of the Miami Hurricanes football program? How would you respond to this?
On the rise.
Yeah,
I will say that, on the rise. I don't think that they're an ACC contender this year. Although when I talked to Coach Cristobal, he was pumped up. He really likes what they have coming back this year. Thinks there's been vast improvement on the offensive line where they've gotten bigger, stronger, and longer. And on the defensive front, also bigger, stronger, longer. So he's done a lot to add size, talent, and I think both the lines are going to be improved. They've got Tyler Van Dyke back at quarterback. I remember heading into last season, Tyler Van Dyke was one of the top quarterbacks out there. Everybody expected a big year, and then he just didn't mesh with the offense. He has meshed with Shannon Dawson's offense, and I think we'll see big things out of him. And defensively, they'll be better. Now, last year they were 5-7. They do make my most improved list. They're number 17 on my experience chart. But when you look at the schedule, that Texas A&M game is going to be really tough week 2. I'm very high on the Aggies this year. At North Carolina, hosting Clemson is not easy, and then playing at NC State and at Florida State. I think the schedule's too tough to put them as an ACC contender this year. But what I think you'll see is much better line play, much better quarterback play, much better team overall. Probably 7-8 wins this year, and then next year they'll be in contention in the ACC. So probably a year away.
Here with Phil Steele, and of course, as you were watching this here, you're seeing me hold up the best college. There are no other college football preview magazines on my desk because there just simply doesn't need to be. All right, Phil, let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about college football. Obviously, the big news last week was Colorado leaving the Pac-12, going to the Big 12. I kind of ask our viewers to send me in some questions, good questions that they would have for you. And one of these questions I thought was very good. You see the Pac-12 and what's happening there, USC, UCLA, making the Big Ten a coast-to-coast conference. Where are we finally heading to those 3 mega conferences in a couple of years? Or like the Big 12 managed to do and survive by bringing in those schools when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving. Can the Pac-12 survive? And does D1P5 football survive?
Yeah, and I've thought for the last 4 years or so that we're heading to 4, 16, or 20-team super conferences. It appears we're on that way, but I'll preface it with this. When the Big 12 announced that Texas and Oklahoma were leaving, I said, that's it. The Big 12's toast.
Yeah.
The Pac-12's going to gobble them up. The ACC's going to gobble them up. The Big 10's going to gobble them up. They're done. They can't possibly survive losing their 2 flagships. And now look at the Big 12.
Yeah.
So at the moment, Pac-12 is on life support. But I thought the Big 12 was toast, and we'll see if they can survive. It's always good to have a West Coast conference, specifically, like the Pac-12 is out there. And I'm rooting for them to survive. I wish they'd sign that doggone TV deal, and hopefully it's something we can watch. It's tough having 12 TVs not able to watch some of the Pac-12 games. And
I'm going to be selfish here for a minute because I want your thoughts. And we do actually have a lot of Maryland transplants here in the state of Florida, a lot of northern transplants. Maryland Terrapins this year, Phil. How do you see them with Tagliavola back there? I always screw his name up, Phil. But the quarterback. How do you see him back? How do you see those guys this year?
I like what they have skill players-wise on offense. Talia Tagovailoa is an outstanding quarterback. They've got Hemby at running back. They've loaded a receiver. They added Tyrese Chambers from FIU, which was a big pickup. Caden Prather from West Virginia to go along with Jashawn Jones. My concern on offense would be the offensive line. They only have one starter back. Coach Loxley told me he feels good about the top 8, but they need to stay healthy. And then the defensive line, they lose all 4 starters. Now, once again, Coach Loxley feels they've upgraded the pass rush ability of the defensive line. But I think when you're young like that on the offense and defensive lines, that's when you tend to struggle a little bit. So while they have the skilled players to play with the big boys and the back 7 to play with the big boys, I don't like them at the line of scrimmage to play with the big boys this year. I think it'll be much like the past couple of years where Maryland beats up on most of the Big Ten teams, but when they play the Michigans and Ohio States, that's where they're going to struggle. And they play, naturally, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. They also draw a physical Illinois coming out of the West, along with Nebraska, which is going to be more physical this year. So I see a good year for Maryland. I just don't see them as a contender in that loaded Big Ten East.
All right, Phil, as we wrap up here, I'm going to throw 1 or 2 at you from my viewers that sent in these questions. I promised them I'd ask, so I'm going to go ahead and ask. And I think this is a really good one. The USC Trojans, obviously, Lincoln Riley gets his Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Is this a national championship contending football team?
As long as the defense improves like Coach Riley thinks it has. When I went over the squad with them, naturally brought in a lot of transfers on defense, and I've got 5 of them starting. Guys like Bear Alexander up front from Georgia, 315-pound defensive tackle, is my number 6 rated defensive lineman out of high school. Anthony Lucas brings 295 pounds at defensive end. He was my number 6 rated defensive lineman out of high school from Texas A&M. They had in Oklahoma State one of their top tacklers, and Mason Cobb. They had in Christian Roland Wallace from Arizona, a top-notch cornerback. I don't think their defense has to be elite, and it won't be elite, but it's got to be better than last year. Now, offensively, there's no questions. As long as Caleb Williams is healthy, look out. One of the best receiving corps in the country, top-notch offensive line, top-notch running back corps. The defense improvement's going to have to be there. Now, they were within 1 game of making the playoff last year, and they beat Utah in the Pac-12 title game. They would have got there. But I think if they match up against an Alabama or a Georgia or Ohio State or a Michigan, they're going to need that defense to show the improvement that Coach Riley hopes they're going to make this year.
And Phil, real quick here, NIL. As we go into another year on name, image, and likeness, there's a lot of debate in the state of Florida. 30 states now legalize NIL for high school sports, which is absolutely insane to me. But NIL for college football, has it been good or has it been bad for the game?
It's basically pay for play.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not what when they said they were going to go this route, I'm like, well, you're not really going to get that. I mean, what car dealership is going to want your offensive guard? How many cars is that guy going to sell for you? But they basically pay these guys for play. And what it's really hurting is the group of 5, Alan. I talked to every group of 5 coach out there this year. I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches. And their main concern is, one group of 5 coach told me every single one of his starters have been approached by someone offering $40,000, $50,000, come play for us. It's not an NIL agreement. It's basically pay for play, just brought above board. And that I think really has to change for college football.
And my good buddy wants to know, and I have no idea what this means because I follow enough college football. He says, please ask Phil, is the South Dakota State offense the new flavor of the month?
They won the national title last year, and it was South Dakota or South Dakota State?
South Dakota State, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, South Dakota State won the national title last year. They were very explosive. Their quarterback, Mark Gronkowski, had a 23-5 ratio. Davis ran for 1,300 yards. They appeared unstoppable. It could hurt you both running and passing. So it was great. Now, we're going to see what happens. They lost their longtime head coach who retired. We'll see if they can continue to play well. And by the way, if there is an interest in the FCS, Alan, we are putting out an FCS magazine this year. It's out right now. It's 2 full pages on every FCS team. So you can become an instant expert on every FCS team just like you are in the FBS. That's available right now at philsteele.com. That's philsteele.com, and you get the FCS magazine right now, 2 full pages on every FCS team.
Well, I'm going to go on and order it because there's a lot of FCS football in the state of Florida and here in the Southeast, and that sounds absolutely amazing. Final one, and then we'll let you go, Phil, and certainly appreciate your time here today. Who are the 4, and give me 2 dark horses?
My 4 teams for the title or for the playoff this year, I've got Georgia making it. A great defense. I think Carson Beck will be a Heisman candidate by the end of the year. Nick Saban is not preseason number 1, and that means good things for them. He's only won 1 national title in preseason number 1, like they've been the last 2 years. They won't be preseason number 1 this year. The last time he wasn't, they won the national title. Never discount Nick Saban and Alabama. I've got Michigan making it. You know, it's between Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in the Big Ten East and the Big Ten overall. And Michigan's got the best schedule of the 3, so I went with them. And it's probably Jim Harbaugh's best team that he's put on the field. And then on the ACC, I did go with Clemson because Coach Sweeney told me that this defensive line, while not having the star power of that great 2018 defensive line, is actually deeper in talent and experience. They're loaded at every position. I expect big things out of Cade Klubnik. They've got Garrett Riley coming in as the offensive coordinator from TCU, and they get that big game against Florida State at home. That's why I have Clemson making the Final 4. As far as dark horses go, or non-top 10 teams that I think have a shot at the title, one to throw out at you would be Wisconsin. And I wasn't originally wild about Fickle changing the offense, more passing, but he assured me they're still going to run the football, and they've got Braylon Allen, Ches Maluzzi, that big offensive line. And defensively, they actually have 8 starters back as opposed to only having 3 last year. They make a huge jump on my experience chart of about 100 spots. So they go from inexperienced last year to experience this year. They've got 5 winnable road games. Their toughest 2 home games are Iowa and Ohio State. They catch Ohio State the week after the Buckeyes play Penn State. So I think they have the talent to really surprise. And one that's at the outskirts of the top 10 nobody's really talking about, I want to throw out Notre Dame to you.
Okay.
With Notre Dame, last year they had a backup quarterback. And this year they've got one of the best. Sam Hartman comes in there, and they've got a great backfield with Estime and Price and Ford. The receiving core is solid. The offensive line's big. The defense is outstanding. They get both Ohio State and USC at home. They do play at Clemson, but if there's an 11-1 Notre Dame at the end of the year, they'll make the playoffs. So keep your eyes on the Irish this year.
PhilSteele.com. Be sure to log on and check him out. And if you don't have this magazine and you're a college football fan, then you're not a college football fan. That's the only way I know how to put that. And make sure you pick up Phil's new FCS guide as well. Phil, we cannot, and I mean this, thank you enough for taking time out of what I know is an extraordinarily busy day to join us here in East Central Florida on Brevard Sports Network. Phil, have a great day.
Hey, sounds great. Hey, a lot of fun talking football with you today. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Phil Steele, everybody, from Phil Steele, the best preview, college football preview magazine. All right, this is Alan Slaughterzinski for the Brevard Sports Network. Have a great night, everybody.